Since the earliest days of civilization, the Chinese have had to deal with nomads raiding their borders. The first solution is well known. But did they really think that would work? That they could just push the nomads away, build a wall, and they wouldn't come back? Well, nomads be like this lady.
Are you coming back?
Is the elephant heavy? I'm coming back, baby.
They came back. And China, like many other states, had to find ways to secure their expanding empires and consolidate their political power. In this video, we're going to look at some of the methods used by states in the classical period to do just that. This is all about state building. To begin, we're going to look at different types of evidence we consider in history, which we call primary and secondary sources. A primary source is a piece of evidence created in the actual time period being studied. This would include archaeological finds, art and poetry, letters, diaries, or court documents from the era in question. For example, look at this poem written in China in the 2nd century BCE. My family married me to the far corners under heaven. Far away in a foreign country, round tent is my house, and fur blanket my wall. Meat is my food, yogurt my drink. I think about my land every day, and my heart grieves. I would rather become a yellow crane and fly back home. And with that, we could figure out a few things about daily life, what people ate, how they slept, and that homesickness was just as real 2,200 years ago. Now, a secondary source is something that's already been written using other sources. The most obvious example is your textbook for this class. The authors have already processed primary and other secondary sources and put together a narrative, description, or analysis of the past. Since we're talking about the Chinese and nomads, let's check out a secondary source on that. Here's a history book called Daily Life in Ancient China. The author, who's already read tons of primary sources, wrote this. Basically, he's saying that the Han, or classical Chinese, were struggling with a nomadic tribe called the Xiongnu, and that the emperor gave princesses to the nomadic chiefs as brides to keep the peace. So this is a great example of a secondary source. And here the historian is describing a method of state building called marriage alliances. I mean, as a method of maintaining stability in an empire, it makes sense in Asian and nomadic cultures where kin and family relations are so important. The bond of marriage and producing children across political lines was thought to bring unity and peace. If you can't beat them, make them family.
You're my family and I love you, but you're terrible. You're all terrible.
Something else this secondary source does. It helps us better understand the primary source we looked at a few minutes ago. Let's go back to that poem. Do you notice how, after learning that China used marriage licenses to make peace with nomads, we suddenly understand more about this woman than simply what she ate, how she lived, and that she's homesick? We understand why she's there, as a bride offered as a gift to make peace. Do you know that sense of having greater understanding about this poem now than when you read it for the first time a few minutes ago? It's because of something called contextualization. You're able to grasp it better because the poem is now situated in its historical context. You know that she was married off to a nomadic chief far away, almost certainly against her will, and that she's homesick. This brings us to the first two tasks of this assignment. To begin with, you're going to contextualize this poem. This simply means giving the backstory. Write a few sentences as if you're preparing someone to understand the poem better. It would be like telling someone what's going on in China before you give them this poem to read so they could make better sense of it. For the second task, you have to do two things. First of all, identify a method of state building used by the Chinese to maintain their empire. Then explain how that method worked to secure the empire. Now you're going to see these two terms a lot this year, so I want to break them down for you. The word identify means to mention something historically specific in a complete sentence. It's really nothing more than that, an identification made in a grammatically correct sentence. No lists, no bulleting. Now the word explain includes everything in identify, but more. Yes, you have to name something specific, but here you're asked to go on and explain how or why something is the case. And you do this in complete sentences. So, identify a method of state building used by the Chinese to maintain their empire, and then explain how that method worked to secure the empire. If you're having problems answering this, just rewind a little. Seriously, just move the slider back a bit. It's never going to be this easy again. The thing about history is that it's complex. It's always changing. Because it's clear from other historical sources that marriage alliances, like walls, don't work forever.
Marriage is a lot of work.
Now, here's a primary source that records an intense debate in China during the 2nd century BCE. It's clear the Xiongnu are back and their army is better than ever. Now, another one of your tasks is to analyze the content of this document and answer a few questions about it. So I think you're getting the idea about how history is done. We're looking at the past, analyzing sources, and making historical claims. Let's look at another primary source. In the same century the previous document was written, we find this one. Look very closely at the source. And I think this is a good time to mention that the source of information is just as important in supporting claims as the content. Much more on that throughout the course. You see, this document comes from a Chinese defector. He left the Chinese and he went to work for the Xiongnu. Traitor! You can sense something interesting in his tone here. But look what he's saying. He's telling the Chinese, his former people, to give the right amount of grain and silk to the Xiongnu and make sure it's the good stuff. If not, we'll ride our horses all over your fields. What's going on here is another important element of state building that will be an important continuity across much of the history we'll learn this year. It's called tribute. This means paying goods or wealth to a stronger power to keep them away. The Xiongnu had established a tributary relationship with the powerful Chinese Empire. Now you're going to move ahead and continue this historical work on these and a few other documents. You'll find the task in the description below as well as in the online course. And after doing this, I'll let you go completely solo. No more nudging you through the analysis or spoon feeding. And I'll let you see what primary and secondary sources can tell us about the decline and fall of the classical estates. See you next time.